Greetings and salutations. Today we will be covering the mystery of who really was the first to summit Mount Everest and leave their footprints on the top of the world. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth. It would also be first ascended by Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary on May 29, 1953. However, there remains a faint possibility that British mountaineers George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine, who had last been spotted at 28,200 feet on June 8, 1924, with the supposed intent to summit while they were going strong and making the ascent to the peak, were the ones to actually have gotten there first. Mallory and Irvine, they had taken their homemade oxygen sets and disappeared into a swirling cloud on that fateful day and never to be seen again. This has left the lingering question of who got there first. Had they reached the summit before disappearing, or had their deaths precluded their ability to reach it? In 1999, the remnants of George Mallory were discovered at 26,700 feet, just within a rubble-covered step of snow on the north face of Everest. Mallory had his body found face down, his fingers digging themselves, clutching into the debris, with a rope bound to his waist. His partner, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. Neither was the vest pocket camera he had supposedly been carrying. Technicians Eastman Kodak have previously stated that the film was likely preserved due to the frigid and frozen conditions of the area, leading to the belief that it might have been salvageable. This has given many the hope that if the film was found, it could potentially show Mallory triumphantly standing at the peak of the world. This would mean 29 years before the first confirmed ascent of the mountain, it would have already been conquered. However, this would raise two avenues of questioning. What happened to the body of the climbing partner, Andrew Sandy Irvine, and what happened to the vest pocket camera? These two pieces of evidence would show whether or not there was evidence that Everest had been conquered in 1924. However, potential evidence withstanding, both Sir Edmund Hillary and his trusted Sherpa Tenzing Norgay remain the duo who have been credited with being the first climbers to reach the top of the Himalayan mountains, Mount Everest, which would be during their 1953 expedition specifically. Now, when contemplating on if Mallory and Irvine were the first to go to the top of Mount Everest, would mean having to think that they also would have been the first to successfully accomplish the summiting of the deadly North Face. This would be a task only accomplished by Chinese climbers some 40 years later, in 1960, or at least that's how the claim stands currently. However, due to individuals such as author Mark Sinnott, who was a part of a 2019 expedition led by New Zealander Jamie McGuinness to try to solve the mystery, which would be revealed in his book, with the contemplation that the Chinese may have found Irvine's body, along with a camera, before burying the evidence. This would be revealed in an email that goes as follows. Dear Mr. Sinnott, my name is Wayne Wilcox. I am a former Marine officer, a former U.S. State Department Regional Security Officer, and a retired Corporate Security Director, now living in England with my wife and two boys. My wife works for the British Foreign Office. Since 2008, I've been sitting on some information that I think would make a good story. With your new book out, I feel you are the logical person to tell it to. I am not a real writer. I don't have the time or the resources to research it and write it. I don't have the clout to get it published, and it's a story that I think should be told. The claim goes as follows. In the third poll, Mystery, Obsession, Death on Mount Everest, that one of McGuinness's contacts told him that he heard directly from an official of the China-Tibet Mountaineering Association. This is the body that regulates ascents on the Chinese side of Everest, claiming that the Chinese climbers had beat us to where Irvine's body was. Further saying the body was allegedly taken off the mountain before taking it back to Lhasa, Tibet, where it is kept under lock and key with the other Mallory artifacts, including the VPK camera. It is known that the Chinese found the remains of a foreign climber at 8,200 meters during their 1975 expedition to the north face of Mount Everest, and on that person they recovered a long-lost Kodak VPK camera and brought it back to Beijing. This is where Wilcox also wrote that they screwed up in the development of the film and ruined it. Rather than admit they made a mistake, they decided to erase all evidence that it had been found, both the camera and the body, or at least attempt to do so. To further things, there was an interview with diplomat Pan Do, which had taken place in 1984 at the headquarters of the Chinese Mountaineering Association in Beijing. The meeting had been arranged at the behest of Sir George Bishop, who at the time was the president of the Royal Geographical Society. Bishop was a former civil servant and businessman. He also was a skilled photographer and a mountaineer who took part in 18 expeditions into the Himalayas. At this meeting, there were two representatives from the Chinese Mountaineering Association. These were Pan Dao and Wang Fuzhou. Fuzhou was one of the three men who made the first ascent on the north face of Everest as a member of the 1960 Chinese expedition. At the time of the meeting, he was the president of the Chinese Mountaineering Association. Pan Dao was the second woman of any nationality to climb Mount Everest, missing out on being the first to Junko Taibei of Japan by 11 days, and the first to do so via the North Face. She was an individual who grew up on the western end of Tibet. Her father died when she was a toddler. By the age of 6, this remarkable woman had been working barefoot in the fields. At the time, her meals were essentially a single barley cake per day and sleeping in with the yaks. In 1959, she was 20 years old and working at the state-owned farm, when her physical strength and work ethic caught the attention of recruiters looking for trainees to join the Chinese mountaineering program, which at the time was just beginning. Later that same year, Pan Dao summited Mushitaga, which was a 24,636-foot tall mountain in Zhejiang. At the time, it was the highest elevation attained by any woman. On the descent, Pan Dao survived an avalanche that killed 5 of her comrades. However, she would not be deterred from further climbing. Out of those who attended this meeting, only the British diplomat remains, however, and when he spoke over the phone in 2001, he stated that he couldn't remember a single thing about Fuzhou. On the other hand, Pan Dao had left an impression. He remembered her as being tiny and having a beautiful high voice. The one detail that he would never forget, however, was that Pan Dao and Fuzhou said that in 1975, the Chinese expedition to the north face of Everest, that the team found the body of Sandy Irvine, along with a Kodak VPK camera, which they brought home with them, and the Chinese technicians attempted to develop the film. However, due to how it was attempted, images were made unrecoverable. As per procedure, the diplomat took notes at the meeting. He would later write a memo which he sent to Sir George Bishop and possibly also to the Foreign Office, but the document itself has disappeared. Now, Mark Sinnott searched the RGS along with the diplomat, who pored over the UK National Archive for days, and Sinnott even got in touch with Sir George Bishop's relatives, who told him that Bishop's widow had burned all of his papers upon his death. As of that moment, the document would remain unconfirmed, more as a supposition of what happened rather than something evidentiary that could definitively prove anything. Mark Sinnott, however, had obtained an email from the diplomat who wrote to the British ambassador to China, Sir Anthony Galsworthy, on May 6, 1999. At the time, the story of Anchor's discovery of George Mallory was spreading like wildfire. With the speculation floating around about the missing camera, the diplomat wondered why Sir George wasn't coming forth with the information of the two men which had been learned in 1984. It wasn't until much later that he learned that Bishop had passed away on April 6, 1999, 3 days before Anchor's discovery. Now, the subject line of the email to Ambassador Glassworthy reads as follows: "Did Mallory climb Everest? I don't have the answers to this question," wrote the diplomat, "but just a possibility. I know how to find it." This was talking about the camera, or to prove that it can never be found. The letter goes on to explain how Fuzhou and Pan Dao told the diplomat, along with Bishop, that the 1975 Everest team had recovered the camera, and stated, "We asked if it had been possible to develop the film. I seem to recall we were told there had been nothing on it. I also recall that we were told that the camera was in the Mountaineering Association's museum. Someone should speak with the Chinese Mountaineering Association. This was a long time ago. I could have gotten it wrong, although I don't think so, and that meeting has always stuck in my memory. If the film really was mucked up, I imagine it is quite possible that the association would deny that the camera had ever been found." Now, it is possible, if not likely, that the film showed Mallory and Irvine on the peak of the mountain. However, this would also cause the Chinese government and the Chinese to lose a claim to being the first to accomplish an ascent on Everest's very deadly north face, an accomplishment which is seen as a rather sacred in the hearts and minds of the Chinese people, and especially to the Chinese government itself. Wayne Wilcox made an arrangement during his search with the editor of The Economist, China's desk interview with Pan Dao. That interview took place through an intermediary. Said interview went roughly as follows. Economist: roughly where on Everest did you discover the body? Pan Dao: probably around 8,200 meters. Economist: what was the condition of the body at the time? Pan Dao: it was a foreigner, and he had a yellow zhangfeng, which means the tent, with nothing else inside. The things had probably already been carried away. Economist: when you saw the body, did you judge he had slipped on his way down from the summit, or did he die some other way? Pan Dao: he probably froze to death. Economist: what about the camera? Pan Dao: I don't remember the details of this. We buried him under a pile of stones. It wasn't bad. We stood there, freezing. The body lay on the floor. When we went to pull him, maybe spleen or whatever, all would have been damaged. We considered it and put some small stones on the body to show our grief and or mark the grave. When directly asked about the camera, Pan Dao would deny having seen it and said maybe somebody else had. Like many other clues in this mystery, the interview offered more questions than answers. However, we do have Pan Dao admitting that the team had found the partially buried body of a foreigner in 1975 at around 8,200 meters. And we know that there was no one other than Mallory and Irvine who had died that high on the mountain at that time. She doesn't admit to finding the camera, but it's likely that she may not have been speaking as freely as one would like to, as she did back with a diplomat in 1984. As this would be detailed in the book, this would later be further substantiated in Mark Sinnott's book, noting that even though they had the testimony of several Chinese climbers to say to the contrary, that the 84 interview is substantially believable enough to operate on the basis that it is true. About a month after speaking with the diplomat, Sinnott managed to track down Dechen Nodgrup, a CTMA official who had been on the mountain in 2019, and he told him about the recent revelations regarding the camera, asking if he knew about it. The individual spoke and said he didn't. However, he would go on to say that he knew Pan Dao personally, and said she is an amazing lady in China, and she was before she passed away in 2014. After her Everest climb, which ended up costing her some of her body, including her toes. Some of the toes, not all of them. Pan Dao would tell a reporter that Chinese women have a strong will, and difficulties can't stop us. We climbed the highest peak in the world. We really hold up half the sky. She went on to be elected as 5 times deputy of the National People's Congress. In 1981, she would move from Tibet to eastern China, where, as a vice director of a sports team, she trained the next generation of aspiring Chinese mountaineers, laying the groundwork for what is now Chinese mountaineering as a whole. Dechen stated that Pan Dao had never mentioned a camera to him, and he did not know of it being in the museum in China. He promised Mark Sinnott that he would ask the surviving members of the 1975 expedition. Sadly, Sinnott has not heard back from him. If the camera was found in 1975, it is possible for it to reside in the Snow Mountain Museum in Lancashire. However, it is not known if anybody has been to said museum and found it. At the time, Sinnott had found that there was a program for it online, offering guided tours of some sort. Some of the historical items that were shown in this program were artifacts that had previously not been reported to have been brought down from the mountain. However, it was never shown to be a possibility that the camera was part of the items taken down and not mentioned. However, Sinnott was not able to visit this museum due to certain events that restricted travel between nations. Now, while Sinnott said information echoed rumors that the 2019 team had heard earlier in the expedition, and he also added that we now have multiple sources all essentially saying the same thing. The Chinese found Irvine and removed his body, and are jealously guarding it for some reason. This information has not been officially released to the rest of the world, and they are protecting it in order to protect the claim for the 1960s team reaching the summit through the north face first. Now, we must understand that the last time that they were seen, Mallory and Irvine were just around 800 feet from the summit of Everest, meaning that while a difficult trek, it's not an insurmountable distance to believe that they covered. Now, the question of if they actually summited would still remain, but sadly, the answer to this question will remain unanswered for the foreseeable future. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.